Our Old Testament lesson this morning comes to us from the book of Genesis. We read Genesis 12. This is the first call to Abram or Abraham, and it's God's call to him to go on the adventure of his lifetime. And he was no spring chicken when this came. Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the possessions that they had gathered and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak at Moreh. And that time the Canaanites were in the land, and the Lord said to Abram, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Our New Testament lesson comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, reading in Luke chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. At that very hour, some of the Pharisees came to Jesus and said, "Get away from here, because Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go tell that fox for me, 'Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will finish my work. And yet today and tomorrow and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Amen. This is the word of the Lord. I'm about halfway through a really fascinating book right now called Illumination in the Flatwoods. It's written by a man named Joe Hutto, and it's about a very significant year in his life in the early 1990s. At that time, he was living on a farm in North Florida in the Panhandle outside of Tallahassee. And one April, he heard another farm worker say to someone else how sad it made him when he was bush hogging, when he was clipping the edges of the fields, and he would accidentally run over a nest full of turkey eggs. And it would happen once or twice a day every spring. Now, Hutto had turkey hunted while growing up, and he'd learned to revere the American wild turkey as a species, as all true hunters do. Now, I know this may sound ironic to a lot of people, but hunters are some of the most dedicated conservationists and preservationists in the entire country for all kinds of species and habitats. Hunters care more about preserving natural habitats like bottom swamplands and hardwood forests and hundreds of thousands of acres of native grasses. Hunters, like some others, are very close to the food chain, and they appreciate the environment the best. And if only there were more hunters in our country, we wouldn't have nearly all the environmental problems that we do. Would love to hear some feedback on that sometime, and I'm happy to engage in that conversation if that sounds ironic to you, but I think it's true. You may have heard that Benjamin Franklin wanted the national emblem of the young United States to be the wild turkey, not that skanky, dirty, bald eagle, because turkeys are so smart and fierce and protective of their own kind. Franklin's opinion, of course, lost out to others, but that can only be because they had never seen a wild turkey in full strut outside. If they had, then they would have agreed with Franklin easily. Joe Hutto told that grass cutter that he overheard, He told him, well, the next time you see a nest, if you can see it before you run over it, I'll take some eggs out of that nest. And rather than receiving maybe 2, 3, or 4 eggs, he came home the next night to discover on 2 different occasions, 2 nights in a row, big metal bowls full of turkey eggs. And he never imagined what the next year of his life would be like. So the book is a 1-year journal about what it was like from the moment he received those eggs until those turkeys were released into the wild. Immediately he received them. Some of them were still warm from the nest, and he knew that he had to keep them warm, but not too warm. He watched over them hour by hour, not sleeping very much at all, but watching over them until each one, the poult would peck through, and then the spider web crack would come, and then each one hatched. He watched every one hatch. He made a little nest in an outdoor pen, and then he quickly learned, of course, that everything in the woods wants to eat either a turkey egg or a young turkey. Bobcats, raccoons, coyotes, skunks, snakes, possum, even deer will eat a turkey egg. Worst of all are the foxes that will eat the eggs and the poults as soon as they start to hatch. Annually, only 10% of all turkey eggs ever make it into adulthood. 90% are destroyed by some kind of predator. The most important part of the process of raising these young turkeys for Hutto came with what he called imprinting. So that each time he watched an egg start to hatch, he would then stare at that baby turkey, stare at it for 30 minutes, and it would stare right back into his face. He was imprinting the side of his face into their eyes and their little brains by just staring at them one by one. And then he would call to each one in a low, gentle, comforting purr so that each one of them could learn his turkey voice. Imprinting, and this is across all species, of course, but imprinting for him, it really was about trust. It was about trust so that he could learn, he could teach them to trust him, and that he would teach them how to survive in a world full of predators. He became their mother hen. And after a few weeks, he would lead them out of the little pen, out into the fields, into the woods, and he would cluck and he would purr when all things were good, when it was all safe. But then he would see a snake, he would see a predator, a fox, and he would just cluck like crazy and give them the scared alarm cluck so that they could run or even fly up to the trees and be safe. He took these young hens under his wings, so to speak, and he imprinted his face and voice into their minds and taught them how to trust him. I thought about that this week, this intriguing book and this intriguing story about Jesus comparing himself as he looks at the city of Jerusalem, comparing himself to a hen, talking about the city that he loves. He loves Jerusalem. He wants to take Jerusalem and all of its people under his wings. He talks about how he longs to protect them and guide them and comfort them. And he is totally realistic about this city that he loves. When he says that name, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I mean, you could just hear sentimentality dripping off of his voice, a place that's central to his own identity, a place that he loves, but also a place that he grieves over. He mentions how throughout history, the messengers of God have been opposed and they've been taken out by people who want them gone. 2 Chronicles 24 talks about a prophet named Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, who speaks against the corrupt king Joash. So then Joash, of course, commands that the prophet Zechariah be stoned to death for threatening his power. And he does so in the middle of the central temple courtyard, which violated all kinds of laws in the Torah. Other sources outside the Old Testament talk about the lives of the prophets and how many of them were martyred because of what they spoke to people in power. So yes, Jesus has this deep, deep affection for a place and its people. He knows it's really good history, and he knows all of the bad in its history. All these events mixed in, evil and good. He loves the city, while at the same time he is so realistic about its brutality and its evil. And I couldn't help think about these themes this week when my own beloved hometown of Memphis saw again the killing of someone who I actually knew and spent some time with over the years, Pastor Ricky Floyd from the Pursuit of God Church in Fraser. We weren't close friends, but we were friends. And I've spent a lot of time at his church up in Fraser. I've learned from him about his ministries up there. I don't know anything about the circumstances of why he was, where he was, and what he was doing, but I know about the circumstances of his ministry in Fraser. And I've listened to him. I've heard him describe the after-school mentoring programs that he helped start in that area. I've listened to him, I've fellowshiped with him, and he's talked about his efforts of pulling young men especially out of the evil of gangs and drug dealer groups. That was such a heart of his ministry. He started a fatherhood program to teach people how to be great fathers, to provide for their children and their families. So his work, he acknowledged, was putting him in danger because he was a threat to the gang leaders and the drug leaders up there in Fraser, because he was pulling people out of their influence and out of their world. He was providing an alternative life to what they were trying to recruit young men into. And the gang leaders saw Ricky as a threat to their money and power and influence in Fraser. And I thought about the 5 generations on both sides of my own family and forebears who have called this place home and who've worked here, were educated here, started businesses here, who've tried to make this community a better place. I know what Jesus is saying when he talks about a place that you can love with all your heart and yet at the same time be totally realistic and understanding of its history and its brutality and its flaws. So should Jesus just give up on that city of Jerusalem, call it evil, bemoan it, and leave it to its own ruin? The text doesn't indicate that he does that, because he ends with verse 35 and ends in a future blessing. He signals a day of blessing and hope and redemption. He knows that he and the city will go through lots of pain, and he will go through pain and suffering in that city. But he talks about a future day of God's blessing, a day of hope and redemption that is coming. I say all this to remind maybe myself, but maybe all of us as a congregation and a church about our own mission and our concern about the cities of Memphis and Germantown and Collierville and all of Shelby County. Is it possible to love deeply, to be so grateful for a place and its history, and yet to totally understand and grieve over that same history and evil in that place as well? Of course, yes. We denounce the evil in those who do it, and at the same time, like Jesus, we do see so much good in the history and in the people. And like Jesus still loved the city, recognize that God is at work. God is at work saving people from a desperate life through people like Ricky Floyd and his congregation and even this congregation. We strive as a congregation not just to bemoan and complain about all the bad and then retreat into the leafy suburbs as if the leafy suburbs didn't have all kinds of problems on their own, which they do. No, we don't just complain, we double down. We double down on our hope and our care for the city and the people who need it the most, especially children and their education and their healthy growth. In other words, we follow Jesus and we go where he goes, always. Which brings us to this Lenten sermon series and this title, God is on the Move. And we see today that Jesus moves into more opposition. The longer his ministry goes on, the more opposition he starts to encounter. Now, it is so ironic about Jesus and his ministry. It is ironic that for some people, their reaction to Jesus is not one of reception, but in several places in the New Testament, they ask Jesus, they even beg Jesus to leave, to go away. I mean, it might be Peter. Peter's own reaction in one of the Gospels, Peter's own reaction when he sees Jesus and hears him is not, "Oh, thank you, I love what I'm hearing." Peter's reaction is, "Go away, Jesus. Leave me alone." Probably because he's just heard Jesus teach, and Jesus has opened up a window into his own soul, and he doesn't like what he sees in his own soul. On another occasion, Jesus heals a man of many demons, a man called Legion, because he has all these powers at work in his life bringing destruction. Jesus heals him, sends the demons into a flock of pigs who go berserk and plunge themselves over a ravine and down a cliff. When the swineherds and the people of the village see the man healed and restored, but then also see the assets of the village at the bottom of the cliff, they say to Jesus, "Go away." They plead with him to leave. The implication is that they cared more about their financial loss than about the healed man. And Jesus has threatened their livelihood. In the book of Acts, same things happens as Christianity spreads. As it spreads around the Mediterranean world, more people convert from idol worship to Christianity. And the silversmiths in Ephesus, for example, the silversmiths see the threat that Christianity is to their trade and their business, and so they arrest Paul and they beat them and they try to expel the Christians out of the city. In today's reading, the Pharisees tell Jesus to go away, Jesus, because Herod wants to kill you. Now, we don't know if they are sincere in their warning or if they're using Jesus as a foil to get what they really want, which is also for Jesus to go away. We know that throughout his ministry, the Pharisees grow more agitated by Jesus when he does what he does to help people. We know that if in their mind, if Jesus is giving people direct access to God, then they won't need the Pharisees anymore. And that threatens their religious control. Herod's administration grows more worried also about Jesus because he's amassing a large group of followers. And they are threatened, Herod is, by this threat to the established political order and to the status quo. Herod wants to control people politically. The Pharisees want to control people religiously. And for all of them, that control affects their wallets and their money and their power. When Jesus threatens people's grasp or their beliefs on religion, political power, or money, then usually people start to oppose Jesus or his followers. And I think, this is maybe oversimplified, but I think this is true, that these three categories, religion, power, politics, power, and money, that those are the categories by which we all try to organize our world and make sense of our world and society and our place in it. Religion, first. Sociologists, anthropologists, people who study religions from every ancient culture until now, they say, and I know this is a really simplistic summary, but most of them see how religion for so many cultures boils down to this: live in the right way to appease angry gods or a god. Live a morally good life to appease the gods and therefore be granted an afterlife. The basic religious history of humanity then is something like this: live a good life because you get what you deserve. You reap what you sow. When I look around at our own culture, it seems like that is such the dominant religious view of so many people out there. If I live a basically good life, if I don't cause trouble, if I care about my family, if I'm kind to some people and help people along the way, if I generally do good, and people always assume they are better than they are, but if my lifestyle isn't too decadent, then I'll go to heaven after I die. I'll get what I deserve, and what I deserve is good. But then there's Jesus and the faith that he teaches. Jesus, who wants to educate us instead about a God of grace and about not getting what we deserve, about a God who you can't appease, so stop trying because you can't appease, and that God is not angry out to judge you and punish you, that kind of religion. And thank goodness Jesus teaches something so different from what so many people think religion is. Politics. In our world, politics is, and yes, another crude summary here, but politics is generally the way we try to organize ourselves socially or in a society. We want governmental policy to be good, and what we mean by good is to match our beliefs and to benefit ourselves. We want our belief systems to win for the society to be ordered around us in the way that we want. And that doesn't mean then that what we believe in is wrong, but it may mean that we have blinders on toward what other people believe. Certainly the founding fathers knew this. They knew that a society of politics meant the clashing of self-interests. The clashing of self-interest, and that democracy tries to wrestle with how to have the best society without any one ruler or one party or one group of people using power or threats to intimidate the other. And money is something we all use in one way or another. We all use our money as a way of control, either controlling our world or organizing our world, asserting our control sometimes over others, even family. We certainly don't like people putting limitations on us when it comes to money. That I will spend what I will spend within my means or not on whatever I want, whether that's food or homes or hobbies, and no one can tell me not to, not even God, not even Christ. Please don't see the biblical parameters around stewardship that God expects. It's interesting. Remember this. Remember, the only person who ever walks away from Jesus who receives a personal invitation to follow, the only person who leaves Jesus behind is the one who had great money and possessions. So when Jesus walks into opposition, when he is opposed, it is because I think what he does is open a window for people into their own hearts when it comes to religion, politics, and money. And most people don't like what they see in themselves. So some people want Jesus to leave. But for those who do like what they see in that window, or at least they like what Jesus is trying to teach them through that window, for those who will look into Jesus' eyes, for those who will let Jesus look into their eyes and let his face be imprinted on their hearts, for those who will listen when he calls and who will follow him, for those who will understand his warnings about what is dangerous in this world, for those who will let Jesus enfold his wings around us in protection, for those who will let Jesus do that, for them, for us, all of life, all politics, power, money, all of those things become something very different entirely from how the world sees them. They become for us the means to an end and not an end in themselves. They become a means to an end to serve God in God's kingdom. They become the means by which we do love our neighbors in the city, how we serve those who do need help and protection, especially the young and the vulnerable. These things are always a means to an end for Jesus' followers. So for this Lenten season, I'll finish up by just asking you, will you allow Jesus to walk into those places in your heart where you oppose him? Because all of us do in one way or another, because we're all flawed and we all have opposition to God's word in some place in our lives. Are you willing to listen to his challenges in those places where you just want to control things in your life? Your understanding maybe of religion or politics or money or whatever else it may be. Will you listen? And will you invite him to imprint his image on your soul? Listen to his gentle calling. Listen to his warnings. Allow him to enfold you and protect you through this life and then into his kingdom. What will you do during this Lenten season. Amen.